Hi everyone, it's Claire Backen from Your OT Tutor and welcome to another Your OT Tutor tutorial. Today I'm joined by the fabulous Ilissa Liew from Unicare Health, and she's going to be using their fantastic new education studio to take us through a really practical session to show us everything we need to know about profiling bed functions. So I'm going to hand it over to Ilissa in a moment, but just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're joining us live for the YouTube premiere, remember you can use the chat to ask us any live questions that you have. If you're watching this afterwards, either just on my YouTube channel or via the Your OT Tutor Learning Library, if you do have a question, you're welcome to just get in touch with Ilissa or myself afterwards at any point. You'll be able to find our contact details at the end or in the text section underneath this video. But let's hand over to Ilissa and let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Claire, for inviting me along to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about. I quite often hear from OTs, physios, or nurses, or even carers that a bed is just a bed. Hopefully by the end of the session today that I'll be able to convince you that a bed is not just a bed. So you're here really to understand the electric profiling bed function. So looking at the type of position that with your profiling bed, what positions it can take your client into, and what are some of the clinical application of that. All right, so a little bit about me. I am a clinical educator at Unicare Health, specializing in sleep support surfaces. So my area of focus is bed and mattress, and obviously some form of bed positioning as well. Unicare Health is a AT supplier in WA, but we've recently had a branch open in New South Wales, so we do sell to eastern states as well. I am an OT, as I say, through and through. OT has been an OT for the last 17 years almost now. Consider myself a night owl, but I think because of society, professional work expectation, unfortunately, that doesn't go too well sometimes. But yeah, in general, on the weekends, I think I generally function better at night with my two loyal furry assistants by my side, my two Labradors who will not leave my side. My experience, I've got experience in various settings. I've first started in residential aged care community as my first career stint there for a good, I think about 7 years, and I was doing some part-time work there and went into part-time disability employment, discovered that my passion lies in community. So then that's when I went into community neuro, worked a lot with MS clients, ND clients, all sorts of neuro conditions, then into community aged care. So I've worked across NDIS in its early days, and as well as home care package and CHSP, so Commonwealth Home Support Program. It's a bit of a mouthful. Right, the learning objective today, as I say, firstly, it's really important for us to be able to understand and identify profiling functions available on electric bed. Yesterday, interestingly, I was out at an aged care facility and I trained about 16, 17 OTs, physios, nurses that work with electric bed on a daily basis. They have beds with various profiling options, yet they had no idea what some of them were called and what were the purpose of those profiling options, which I thought was really interesting because obviously the aged care facility spends a lot of money and invests in those beds that have various functions, various profiling options to allow the resident to be in all sorts of position, but staff do not know how to use them or don't even know what they are called. Anyway, second point of the learning objective is being able to apply the profiling features to support the clinical needs for your client. So things like functional mobility, pressure care, reducing false risk is another big one, comfort, obviously, and manual handling principles. And thirdly, but also probably most importantly, being able to understand, demonstrate the clinical reasoning of those profiling options. We don't want to overprescribe as clinicians. We don't want to underprescribe as well. But we want to make sure that at the start, we have done the holistic assessment, understanding what are the needs of our clients, our patients, and then being able to match that with the feature of the AT, and in this instance, the beds. I think as clinicians have the responsibility to understand the clinical application of each of the features. Obviously, a lot of that falls under the supplier's responsibility as well, because I understand that technology changes every time and we have improved technology almost every year. But I think as clinicians, we still need to have a basic understanding of that so that we're a bit more intelligent and ask those really intelligent questions when we talk to our AT suppliers. Okay, we're going to jump straight in. I'm going to start with this slide, I thought, because these are the less known positioning or profiling options on beds. I'm going to do a laser pointer so you can see my laser pointer. So on the screen, on the left-hand side, you will see Trendelenburg and reverse Trendelenburg. Now I'm going to start talking about this using my slide, but at the end of this, as we've gone through the slide, I will demonstrate it on a bed so that you can see what it actually looks like on beds. Trendelenburg, in a layman's term, Trendelenburg just means that you're tilting the bed backwards. Okay, so lots of electric profiling beds these days have Trendelenburg function. And this was one of the functions that yesterday in the group of 16, I think only about a handful of 4 or 5 of those clinicians have heard of Trendelenburg, knows that Trendelenburg is a feature on the beds that they work with, but the rest, about 10 of them, had no idea that these exist on their beds. So essentially, we're tilting the bed backwards. Will we ever have our residents sleep overnight or our clients sleep overnight in this position? I don't think so. I've never come across a situation, or I certainly have not recommended for someone to be in a tilt position through the night, because there's a risk associated with it. And one of the really good example is if someone have high blood pressure, for example, you would not necessarily have the person in this position for a prolonged period. Okay, it's risky for that person to be in such position for a prolonged period. But what it's useful for on its own is that you can use this position, so tilt the bed backwards, to help your client get up the bed, or they can maybe help themselves get up the bed. In a facility environment, if the client or the residents are not able to do that themselves, I have seen certainly carers using slide sheet underneath the person's pelvis, along with the Trendelenburg position, to assist someone up the bed. So manual handling, reducing the risk and the strain for the caregivers. When would you then use this position? So if you look across the screen, you see this pressure care position right here. So this certainly is not well known. I rarely see, if I walk into an aged care facility or a community client's home, I rarely see client, residents or patients in this position. So today I just want you to have a think, because this position, we do use it quite a bit in wheelchair. Essentially in a wheelchair, probably looks slightly different. In a wheelchair, we tilt the chair. We call it tilt-in space. We have tilt-in space wheelchair. We have tilt-in space commode. When you tilt the chair or the commode and the bed in this position, in this situation, you're changing the center of gravity. And it is really common for us to prescribe tilt-in space wheelchair or commode for someone that has pressure injury risk. So we have a bed If someone has a bed that has Trendelenburg feature, I highly recommend that you look into this position and see whether or not this is a suitable position for your client, particularly if you're working with a client that has chronic pressure injury, for example, on the ITs. Okay, so you're changing that center of gravity whilst the person is in bed. Often we come across clients that has chronic pressure injury and has been told to spend more time in bed. That certainly was a practice, a very popular recommendation by consultants and GP back in the day when I first started in community practice. It is not as common these days because obviously we look at the person's holistic needs. That said, I recently met a gentleman who came into a Unicare showroom, and with his OT, he's got a chronic pressure injury on his right IT, I believe, and he has been told for the past 4 years to remain in bed as much as he can. So he could only spend 20 minutes out of bed, which obviously had a detrimental effect on his mental health and comfort. He could not get comfortable because he didn't have a bed that could be tilted backwards and be set up in this position. So yes, be mindful that you can use Trendelenburg with a combination of head elevation on your bed to change the center of gravity for someone that is in bed. Now, back across to the left-hand side of the screen, we have now reverse Trendelenburg, which is tilting the bed forward. Again, it is not a position that I will ever have someone in for a long time. As you would be able to imagine that if you tilt the bed forward, that is going to cause someone to slide down their bed relatively easily. But what I would use is, again, a combination of reverse Trendelenburg and other profiling options on your bed, which is, in this case, if you look across the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the chair position. And if you can imagine that there is a knee break engaged here, so the knee is raised and the back is raised. And along with the reverse Trendelenburg, you can get someone in what we call a chair position. Okay, you're imitating someone's position in a chair. I use this position a lot when I work with palliative clients or even M&D clients or anyone that spend a prolonged period of time in bed, or if they do have mealtime in bed that they receive mealtime assistance. With palliative client, what I often say to clinicians is when someone is at the end of life, if they can't tolerate being transferred out of bed with hoist, for example, these positions allow them to sit up. These positions allow them to change their position or be repositioned in bed. This position also allow them to engage more with the environment, engage more with their visitors. When someone is unwell, we usually receive visitors, and where do visitors tend to stand? They tend to stand at the end of the bed, at the foot end of the bed. They may be talking to the person. So being able to sit the person up will allow that interaction a lot more.
That's probably a helpful point in terms of if we're justifying the cost of maybe some of these features versus a bed that just has a knee break or something, is it's not just the positioning, it's that social participation as well is a really valuable thing to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And these Trendelenburg, it used to be very rare on beds, but it's very common now. I would say 50% of electric profiling beds these days have got reverse Trendelenburg and Trendelenburg built into it. So as soon as you've got that function built into the bed, you can achieve a lot more positioning ability, so to speak, with that. I have also used the chair position to try to convince and persuade clients to get back into bed. I'm sure we've worked with clients who have slept in their recliner chair for a very long time. refuse to transfer back to bed for their sleep at night. And you know what? I certainly work with clients like this, and you can try to convince them as much as you want to. Some clients are just really adamant. So I have not 100% rate. I have not 100% success rate, but certainly with a few clients, being able to slowly transition them from a recliner into the bed using a bed that has this reverse Trendelenburg, put it into a chair position first, and then slowly but surely get them into a more supine position. Yeah? Okay.
Good suggestion. I think there'll be plenty of people that they just want to sleep in their chair. So yeah, this could be that good option for, say, that slow transition across.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, so those are the reverse Trendelenburg and chair position on some of the application on that. We are now going to talk about knee brake and vascular support. Lots of people know about knee brake. So essentially that's what I call an inverted V, okay? And it's on a hand control. I'll show you what it looks like later, but not a lot of people know about vascular support. If you've known about vascular support, great, but that is quite often, again, available on most beds. It is a built-in function on most beds, and it is a manual vascular support function. So later I'll demonstrate to you how do you actually engage that. Usually most of the time it's on a ratchet system at the end of the bed. I think suppliers don't mention it enough, and certainly therefore OTs don't know about it enough. The difference between knee brake and vascular support brings the whole leg up. Okay, so you can engage the knee brake, lift the end of the bed to bring the whole leg up. That is a function that is used to reduce swelling or manage edema. The less known function of that, again, is I've certainly used it for podiatrist treatment. So a podiatrist or nursing, sometimes wound dressing, you can actually, if they need to get to the lower limb area and someone's in bed for that treatment, to let them know that you have the vascular support where they can actually lift the end of the bed up to allow that access a lot easier. Manual vascular support, again, as I say, it's very common on electric beds. You can also get them as electric vascular support, which is built into the handset. So the person can independently control that. Obviously, the cost is more in that. However, if we talk about allowing someone's independence, if they are able to be in bed, if they do spend a long time in bed, they live alone, being able to lift the end of the bed using the handset to manage the swelling of the lower limb and to reduce the risk of falling, really, because if you have manual vascular support, I would imagine that you will need someone, definitely, to lift the end of the bed, whether or not that's a family member or a carer that comes into your client's environment. Once that's done, you need to then lower it before that person leaves, okay? In a carer situation, before the carer leaves the client's home, they need to lower it. If they don't, then the person is in this position, and being able to get out of bed in this position can be quite difficult and quite challenging, and therefore can be a false risk. So if a client requires vascular support for a clinical reason, you may want to consider an electric vascular support to allow them to independently control that. All right, going back to the left-hand side of the screen now, we've got autoregression. Autoregression is certainly one that is not well known. It is, again, now getting more and more common. These little images here probably doesn't demonstrate it well, but essentially most beds these days have what I call one pivot point between the backrest and the second panel of that bed, okay? It's like what I say, it's like our joints, it's like our elbow, where if you bend your elbow, flex your elbow, it pivots on this point. So that bed, that pivot on it, that point does not have autoregression. A bed that have autoregression, which I'll show you real life later, and there's a video, when you raise the head rest or backrest up, this area here extends. So there's a gap that would extend. So what I generally explain, how I generally explain it is when the back comes up, it goes out as well. That function there allows us to reduce shear. So it's a shear minimization function on an electric bed. It also reduces abdominal compression. Okay, so I like to prescribe a bed with autoregression when I have a client that perhaps have a large abdominal, spends a lot of time in bed. They may have their meals in bed, or they may do a lot of reading in bed, for example, watch their TV in bed after mealtime, where they're seated quite high up, quite upright, sorry. So allowing that space, that extra space when they sit up means that facilitates digestion, breathing is easier. I'm not sure whether anyone of you have set up in an electric bed with no autoregression and actually feel how that feels like. I have done it obviously because I work for an equipment supplier, so I have access to that. And even for myself, I found that if I sit quite upright, my breathing was compromised. I felt it was a little bit difficult for me to breathe. So imagine how that feels for your client that's in there for a prolonged period of time. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide where there's a better demonstration here. So with this is, again, that autoregression. If it comes out and up, you have less pressure point. And you can see that with a bed that does not have autoregression, essentially you're folding the bed and squishing the person in very simple layman's term. I do have
probably contribute to some people feeling, no, I don't want to sit up in bed, because they just have that memory of being squished and being folded, and it's almost like that claustrophobic type feeling, whereas this is, no, we'll sit you up, but we're keeping that space. So is there any situations where you wouldn't really use autoregression, or is it more so if people can adjust themselves easily in bed or reposition that so they don't feel that squash feelings? Because it seems like it could be helpful for everybody, really.
Yeah, unless we have a client that do not spend a lot of time in bed and do not spend a lot of time seated in bed. I think autoregression is really one that you want to have when someone's seated in bed quite a bit. If they tend to have their head or the back raised and a bit of a knee break for whatever reason, if they're in that position for a while, then certainly autoregression is helpful. Okay, but if you have say a client that is really just needing the high-low of the bed to get in and out of bed safely and easily, it's a very stable condition. She or he, the condition doesn't progress, not that in a foreseeable future, then you may not need a bed with autoregression. That said, again, lots of beds these days have autoregression. We just don't talk about it enough. And so if you have a bed that is what the supplier would call a standard profiling bed, that has autoregression built in, hey, it's not going to cost the client more, then certainly I would take it, because from a pressure perspective as well, if that client then, I don't know, have a fall, ended up in a hospital, stint in a hospital, and if they then come home with a pressure injury because of that immobility when they're in the hospital after a fall, broken the hip, these would be very useful feature to have on the bed when someone is trying to treat that pressure injury.
Yeah, definitely future proofs, and not just for people with progressive, but like those just in case type moments. If you can find one where it's standard and it's not going to cost extra, then yeah, perfect option.
Yeah, exactly. All right, there is a video after this. I'm hoping that it plays and you can then see quite clearly what autoregression is. So just watch where that pivot point is when the backrest comes up right there.
Yeah, you can actually see the mechanics of that bar pushing backwards. It's not just that sort of the round circle bit isn't just staying in the one spot, it's pushing back. So
That's it. So yes, it's always better to have something visual to allow that understanding, because we can explain and people just can't imagine it. So video is always good, or demonstrating it with real life equipment. Okay, this slide is a little bit busy. These are some of the common profiling options that you find on electric beds. So we've talked about some of the really less known one, and now I just want to touch on the other common ones. The ones with a star on these screens are the ones that we've talked about. So I will skip some of that. And you can see that on the right-hand side of the screen, that's a handset. That's actually one of our handset, the design of the handset. So I've matched it with, say, number one is the back elevation. So really on the handset, that's quite clearly, you can see that if you press the top row up and down, that control the back. So being able to sit someone up in bed. And then number two, you can see on that second line here, second row here, that controls the knee break, so bringing the knee up and down. Now, one thing that's very important that I say to every clinicians, carers, loved ones, client, that if you were to sit up in bed, it's very important that you engage the knee break before you raise the head or the back. If you don't engage the knee break and you only do the back elevation, you're going to push the client, resident, patient down the bed. And that's how shear injury, pressure injury that's related to shear force can happen, and we see it very often. Again, if you do have access to supplier where you are, the next time you go into a supplier's showroom, try to go onto a bed and try to elevate the back without the knee break and see what happens. You will feel shear force down your back and bottom, also on your heels, because you actually is being pushed down the bed. And I have certainly seen very extreme cases of that, where someone gets pushed down the bed because they don't engage the knee break and their feet are on the footboard of the bed, which obviously can be really uncomfortable if the person can't shift themselves back up the bed. And that remains there for the rest of the day until someone sees it or a carer comes in. And not only come in and identify that's a problem. I have then in one instance, worked with a gentleman who then would lift his entire leg and rest his heels on the footboard, and that caused pressure injury, and it was a stage 4 pressure injury by the time we got engaged. So whilst it's just back elevation, if we don't know how to use it correctly, it can actually cause harm. So if you forget everything that I say today, the most important thing that I'd like you to remember is engage your knee break before the back elevation. Now you have number 3 here, which says auto contour. If you do have this on the handset, which is this third row here, even better. So basically with a press of the button, this will bring the knee break and backrest up together. Okay, not all handsets got this, but more and more handsets are starting to have it now because of the risk of bringing the back up without the knee break. So if you have auto contour on someone's handset, do use that. I always encourage carers to use this. This is the only row that I actually highlight to them as the first and foremost priority, because particularly if you work in, say, SDA, a facility, aged care facility, where, staff are really time poor and they may not remember, okay, knee break before back elevation. So then it's okay, if you need to sit someone up in bed, use the third row or whatever row that is on that handset. High-low is quite self-explanatory, so bringing the bed up and down. We as clinicians are quite good in identifying how low can the bed go. We always ask that question, how low can this bed go? Can this bed go all the way down to the floor, so like a floor line capacity bed, or is it just a standard height bed? Now, very good questions to ask, but also ask, how high can the bed go? Because the highest point is important if you do have a very tall carer who needs to provide that bed-centered care for the person that's in bed. For example, if they do need to help the person turn the person, to be able to know that highest point to make sure that it's safe for that manual handling task. And just for your interest, standard profiling bed height, the lowest standard profiling bed height is about, from floor to the base, is about, you get about 230 mil to maybe 280 mil. That's floor to the bed base without the mattress. And a floor line capacity bed goes down to about 110 mil off the ground, so 11 centimeters or 10 centimeters off the ground. Okay, so it's quite significantly lower. All right, and then we have, obviously, number 5 here is Trendelenburg. That's the tilt back and forward function that we talked about earlier. And on this handset, you can actually see right here, that is a chair position. So some handset now actually has a button for you to press. You just press and hold that button for a good 10-15 seconds, and it will actually first start with an auto contour on the bed, and then it will bring the bed forward and get the person in a chair position. Okay, so some hand control have that. If the handset doesn't have that, I wouldn't stress. I would just go auto contour and then tilt the bed forward. You can achieve the same thing.
I suppose that's something to consider in terms of if controller options is the cognitive capacity of either the carers or the person, if we're trying to get them to be independent to do it. If there is an option, even if it's a little bit more expensive to get all these preset things, then that's the argument. Is if we get the preset, we're simplifying the task demands to actually increase their independence or the carer's ability to manage it as well if they have their own difficulties. So important option.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And even say, again, going back to that facility environment where staff are really time poor, and being able to remember now to sit someone up in a chair position, what steps do they have to do? If it's a 2 or 3 steps instructions, rather than I'm going to just press this button here that looks like a chair position, that's going to bring my client or my resident or patient into a more upright position, that can help. Yes, you're right. And the other preset function that is getting more and more common is a bed exit height. Okay, we have recently just introduced the bed exit height for one of our beds as well. I do think it's really important because particularly if we work with clients that live on their own, clients that live in a very busy environment where they have different care staff, agency staff coming in, but still able to transfer in and out of bed independently, or you may just need that one assist. To teach staff or to teach client what is the optimal height to get in and out of bed can be quite tricky. Back in the day, I used to tape it on the wall as a guide, a visual guide for clients. And these days, you've got handsets that have that preset functions. Our bed, I'll talk about one of our bed later. The bed that we have set it to about 430 mil off the ground without the mattress. So it depends on how thick the mattress is. That's just a default height, but it also allows the clinicians, so in this case it could be an OT or a physio, to change it. So there's a way to actually change that default height to a different height to make sure that it's suitable for that particular client. So it is becoming a really popular option. Actually, even for aged care facility, we've got aged care groups that are really keen on this, because the physio in this situation would go in and assess and go, okay, say the optimum height for in and out of bed transfer for this client is 400 rather than 430. They can then set it on the handset really easily with, I think, press of two buttons. So every handset could be different. You want to talk to your supplier first to identify whether or not that's possible. And secondly, how do we change that? And if we change it, can we change it back to the default height? Because if you do have a different, in a residential environment, residential aged care environment, you may have a different client on that bed. 2 years later, how do you go back to the defaulted height? I find that very helpful. So really, client can just press this bed exit height and you'll bring it down or up to the optimal height for them to safely get in and out of bed.
Yep, another great feature.
Yeah. And then we have the safe sleep. So a safe sleep is another preset height that we have on our beds. Some beds have it. It's not very common, I have to say. I think I've only seen it on 2 or 3 types of beds out there. Really, that height goes to an optimum height for someone to sleep at night. So allowing that proprioception at night, that they're not floor line, so they're not on the floor, so close to the floor, because that itself can be a risk or a restrictive practice for some individuals. So some individuals just need to get low enough to the floor to be able to touch the floor and know where they are in space at night if they get confused waking up in the middle of the night. So that's a safe sleep option. Yeah, it's not an option that everyone needs. Certainly, I don't think it's as, applicable or as important as the bed exit height and the chair position in this situation. But yeah, it's out there if you need that. All right, so just quickly want to go through, this is one of our beds, the XL3 Pro, and you can see here that it's such a busy slide because it's a bed, but it's a bed with so many functions. So you can see on here that I've listed that it's standard profiling. So that means that it's a 4-section bed. You go up and down. So you've got the high-low, you've got the knee brake, you've got the back elevation, you've got manual vascular support, you've got Trendelenburg tilting backwards and forward. It has autoregression, it has comfort sitting, it has the bed exit height. Just now that I was talking about, it can go down to a floor line position. So it can go down to 110 or 11 centimeters off the ground. It is programmable as well, actually, which I haven't actually mentioned. So some beds, although they call floor line bed or a bed with a floor line capacity, if you've decided, no, I don't want that bed to go all the way down to 11 centimeters off the ground because that could be a restricted practice for my client, then you can actually see whether or not that can be programmable. So you can set the lowest height to whatever height you decide it's suitable for the person. The highest height on these beds, for example, 740, and again, that's quite common. That's the bed exit. I do want to touch on Linac handset and motor. I know that it's nothing really to do with bed profiling, which is the topic today, but I find that Linac handset and motor, or control boxes and actuators, are a lot more user-friendly, because if you do have any clients that have limited upper limb movement or dexterity, For example, I'm going back to my MND clients where they've lost their hand function, and being able to use alternative controls such as your sit path or the bigger buttons, all those can be integrated really easily with Linac, but not the other type of motor. So if you do work with clients with potentially that may need that, I highly recommend that you look at beds that has Linac handset. They're very common. They are on beds. They're on most hoists these days that we use, which you may not even be aware that it's Linac, and also electric shower commode. So lots of Linac controls are on those. So they're more common than we think it is. And then obviously there's other things here that I'm not going to go too much into, and you have the slide to understand. These are the really important things. What's the safe working load of the bed? Can the bed be extended if you have really tall client? Can the head and footboard be removed if you need it for whatever reason? Underbed clearance for hoist, that's definitely a given these days. I think back in the day, as a community client, I have to always ask supplier, does the bed have underbed clearance for hoist? Whereas now, I actually haven't come across a bed that doesn't. If you get the bed from healthcare equipment supplier, not Harvey Norman, most of the time you'll find beds that have that clearance. Bluetooth handsets, lots of beds have that cordless option as well. With that, I just quickly want to say that if you do opt for a Bluetooth handset, please make sure that you've got the corded handset there, because chances of people losing the Bluetooth handset is quite high, and you don't want to only rely on that. You want the corded handset to still be available so that the person can still control the bed if they lost the Bluetooth handset. Anyway, all right. Okay, before I go to this slide, I just want to then demonstrate on screen some of those profiling options on the beds. Now I've got a bed set up here. So I'm going to bring the camera up. So now you see the XL3 Pro bed. I'm just going to head over. All right. So first it's probably easier for me to just bring the bed down to the floor, and you can see how low this bed can go. So in relation to sort of where I'm standing here, and there's actually another bed next to it on the screen that you can see, that it actually is really close to the floor. It doesn't look like it on the screen because we have the mattress, okay? But really, we're looking at 11 centimeters off the ground, so it's very close to the floor. And as I say, some beds you can program that height. I'll bring it back up. One thing about floor line that I do want to comment on, I've met certainly lots of OTs that say to me, no, my client do not need floor line to sleep in. And I do want to challenge you to think that floor line can be used for transfers as well as sleep position. So your client may not need to sleep that close to the floor, but your client may need a lower bed to base height, floor to base height, to move their lower limbs into bed. So I've come across a client in Unicare showroom where she's come in, she's gone onto our standard bed, and at the lowest point of that standard bed, which was about 28 centimeters off the ground, that was perfect for her. That was an optimum bed exit height for her to get in and out of bed. She struggled with bringing her feet, her lower limbs, into bed with a lower bed height. So we then tried her on the XL3 Pro. She could then, it's easier for her to move her legs into, or lower limbs into the bed compared to a bed that has a standard bed height. Yeah, so you can use the floor line capacity for the transfer, really, because you are bringing the bed closer to the floor.
Yep, that makes sense. So it's definitely a challenger for a lot of clients just getting their feet up. They can do lots of other parts of the transfer themselves. They just need that last minute assist to get their feet up. But if bringing the bed lower means that they don't need that carer, that's easy to justify the extra cost that might be involved.
Yes. All right. So head elevation or back elevation, whatever you want to call it, is really just, you can see now that the back is coming up, okay? The ideal angle is 30 degrees, but then that's for pressure care. Ideal angle, 30 degrees for pressure care. However, not many of the clients that I used to work with could tolerate that. It's not very comfortable and it's not very functional, particularly if you sit up in bed. And in some individuals, they may find that 30 degrees is quite difficult for their breathing. But I thought I just wanted to point that out. So that's your back elevation. And then you can see now the knee break is starting to come up. So this is a knee break. While I've got it here, I just want to demonstrate how you can bring the knee break up, as now you can see it's a vascular support. So you're raising that up and it's really easy to do. I didn't do it at the right height for me. So ideally, I'll bring this bed higher with the high-low control, and then obviously with the right manual handling. It's really light as well, and at most of the time it's at the foot. Yes, it is at the foot end of the bed where the client's weight is not concentrated in this area, so it's really easy to actually lift that up. And really, for most beds that works with the ratchet system like this one, if I keep going, so that's the end range, and lower it, then I've disengaged the manual vascular support. Okay?
Yeah, but definitely that's the reason why if you need someone to be able to take the vascular support on and off themselves, they need the electric function. There's no way they can do that while they're in the bed by themselves if it's manual.
Exactly, absolutely. All right, now I'm gonna tilt the bed forward. This is reverse Trendelenburg. So you can see that I have got knee break up, back elevation up. If I then tilt the bed forward, you will end up, and I won't go to the end range, but it is quite close to a chair position. So someone's actually sitting up, and you can imagine that if I'm in bed right now, that I can actually interact with my environment a lot more. Yes. Yes, that is all that it is on this bed. Okay, so although we're talking about the bed profiling options, I again want to touch on a few important components on bed. I've got everyone. Auto leveling. So auto leveling is a really important feature when you have Trendelenburg and reverse Trendelenburg. It is very difficult for someone to tell where they are in space when they have tilted the bed forward or backwards to know whether or not they're now parallel to the ground. So you don't want any clients, if they live on their own, that they've tilted the bed, say, forward or backwards, and then they need to go into that flat position to be parallel to the ground when they sleep at night. To reduce that risk that we talk about with Trendelenburg and reverse Trendelenburg, auto leveling should be built in. It's not always, unfortunately, but certainly there are beds that are built in. So when a bed is tilted in one position, for a client to go to the other position, they will obviously then press the other arrow. And when it's flat to the ground, it will stop. Okay, it will stop. Your client or your caregivers will have to lift their finger off that handset and then press it again, then it will go to the other direction. So that's auto leveling. It's not a designated button, but certainly it's there so that you are aware. Mattress retainer, this is an absolute passion of mine when it comes to mattress retainer. So really that's just the guards around the beds to hold mattresses in. I think they're very important when it comes to beds. I've come across beds that do not have mattress retainers, and poor OTs that I've worked with, when they've prescribed any sort of pressure care mattress that needs to stay in place like an air mattress, finds it really difficult, even with the mattress strapped in bed. Or if you do have bed that have reverse Trendelenburg and Trendelenburg, certainly you want the mattress retainer. Otherwise, when the residents may end up on the floor when they sit in a chair position. Bed rail mounting, important topic that we don't really have much time to cover on. There's different ways of mounting bed rails. So again, talk to your supplier, ask about Australian standards, make sure that the bed rail, I like bed rails to be mounted into the frame of the bed for security, to be safe and stability. But I've certainly seen very different type of bed rail mounting that, yeah, I have to look away. Removable headboard and footboard, and built-in extension. So yeah, lots of beds can be extended without any tools these days. All right, now last slide from me. We've got a case study on the screen, which I thought would be good to run through together to consolidate what we've learned today, hopefully. Okay, so we've got Molly, 62. Molly was diagnosed with terminal GBM 4 months ago. Condition has progressed rapidly, causing neurological deficits and severe physical impairment. So she's presented with limited mobility, cognitive decline, recently been discharged from hospital with comfort and quality of life as her main goal. She experiences significant weakness on one side, which is the left-hand side, making it difficult for her to reposition herself in bed. She does not have any active pressure injury at the moment, but is at high risk of developing one. Requires assistance with pretty much all her ADLs, live with her husband, daughter and grandchildren, live 2.5 hours away, but would visit once a fortnight. What are some of the clinical consideration that needs to be explored while recommending an electric profiling bed for Molly? Okay, couple of things here. The first one to me is the palliative condition. Okay, so she's got terminal GBM. It sounds like the condition progressed quite quickly or has progressed quite quickly. For me, the first and foremost, I would consider a bed with Trendelenburg. Okay, I would want her to understand what some of those functions are, and maybe her husband and daughter. So a Trendelenburg position allows her to, a reverse Trendelenburg position, so tilting the bed forward, allows her then to get into that chair position, to be able to change her position relatively easily in bed if she still have the cognitive capacity to understand that and to do so. Certainly that there is that clinical need that you can address. She has difficulty repositioning is the other one. So I would consider some sort of mobility rail, because it sounds like it's only one side, and the other side, from what is written or what's been presented, she may still be able to do it on her own. So whether or not you want to have a small mobility rail, not the long one, so it's not a restraint if it's a small rail. And when you do choose those rails, as I say, what type of mounting? Does it get mounted straight into the base of the bed, or is it like a clip-on? Would I ever prescribe a bed that just have a clip-on type bed rail? I don't, but I certainly see them in the market. You do want to assess the risk of that. What's her mobility like? It says that it's limited mobility, so she's got limited mobility, maybe a larger bed height adjustments. You may want the bed to go down to the floor for that transfers that I was talking about, being whether or not moving her lower limb in and out of bed could be a difficulty for her or even for her loved ones if they're still facilitating that, and also how high that bed can go to. Because if she's lost the ability to mobilize and she needs to be hoisted in and out of bed, the husband potentially may be doing that. She may have carers that comes into the home that does that. What is the highest height of that bed? If you've got a bigger range, then it's less restrictive in terms of how tall the caregivers needs to be. Okay, so that's another thing that I will consider. I'll certainly look at her risk of developing a pressure injury. While she does not have an active pressure injury now, she's at high risk of one, or high risk of developing pressure injury. For me, because I'm looking at a bed that has Trendelenburg, has got all the other features anyway, I will talk to a supplier and go, does this bed have autoregression? I would expect that most beds that have Trendelenburg these days to have autoregression built in, because very likely Molly will be spending a lot more time in bed. So she'll be able to either reposition herself or someone else will be able to assist her with that hand control. She will be getting visitors, most definitely. So again, being able to sit her upright, being able to interact with the environment, with her loved ones, that to me is really important. The fact that she has grandchildren, now we don't know how young the grandchildren is. I've certainly seen floor-line bed being used for the purpose of that social interaction with very young children. So if it's a very young 2-3-year-old grandchildren, being able to lower the bed close to the floor means that, and have Molly close to the floor, means that the young children will be able to interact with Molly when they're visiting her. The only thing is, with floor-line bed, I would caution looking at the risk, because there is crush risk associated. So, when someone is lowering the bed when you have young children or pets around, for example, making sure that the person is aware that there's nothing underneath, or the person that's controlling that handset is aware that there's no young children underneath, or no pets underneath. Pets are usually quite quick to react. But in this situation, it can enable that social interaction for that grandchildren, potentially if they're young, but also you want to be quite aware of the risks that may be associated with that. Yes, so that's my thought on this case study. Claire, have you got anything to add, or anything that you think I've missed?
It just really highlights that we can't rely on the equipment supplier to prescribe the best bed. We need to get all this information about the person and what their day is going to be like, what their diagnosis and likely progression is, all those other social factors. And even if you feel overwhelmed by, even going through this today was hopefully really helpful for lots of people and they feel a bit more confident. But even if they're lacking confidence with all the features, all they need to do is know the client really well, their pressure injury risk, their social environment, their goals, how they want to spend their day, and then work in conjunction with the supplier to say, this is what I need the bed to do. What can you tell me? And then hopefully, even if you haven't prescribed a bed for 6 months and there's all these new options, you still can hopefully work out what the client needs, and then the suppliers can fill in the gaps with what's new on the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything does come down to that what I say, the OT formula, and that is, you need to do the assessment. You need to do that comprehensive assessment. You need to understand your client's needs from all sorts of levels. So whether their personal need, their clinical need, the environment need. What do they do in bed? Quite often people think, oh, clients just sleep in bed. No, they don't. What else do they do in bed? Do they get treatment in bed? For example, the podiatry treatment is one that was a really good example. Wounds dressing, getting the wounds dressed in bed. Do they interact with anyone in bed? Do they watch TV? Do they have the mealtime assistance? All sorts of activity that can be done in bed. And I think we need to understand that, to really understand, right, clinically, what do they need? And from a meaningful occupation perspective, if they spend a prolonged period of time, what are some of the features that are available out there? And I think as OTs, we need to know that and being able to communicate that with the supplier. My client has this condition. This is what I see that it's important for her to be able to do in bed and what we want to achieve in bed. What is there out there technology-wise to be able to facilitate that? And that's why it's so important to work very closely with your equipment supplier, but not over-rely on equipment supplier. You need to have, as OTs and clinicians, we need to have that input into what our clients need clinically.
Yep, 100%. It's a joint effort. No one is purely 100% responsible if we want the right fit.
Yes, absolutely. So this is the last slide from me. This is my contact. I thought I'll pop my contact down there. I'm quite happy for people to contact me. If they have any sort of questions, you can email me, call me. You can also contact me via LinkedIn if that's the easiest form of communication for you. And as I say, I'm based in WA and we do have now a branch in New South Wales. So I'm happy for anyone anywhere to contact me if you have any sort of bed-related question or you just need that sounding board from an OT that works really closely with equipment. Very happy to share those information and knowledge with you. So
Thank you
thank you.
so much. No, thank you so much, Illissa. That was really helpful and I think really practical. So lots of, hopefully people go in and see a bed now and actually look at it in more detail and think about what do these actually do? Which order am I pressing these buttons in? But also I think hopefully if the OTs are feeling more confident, keeping in mind that part of our role could be educating the carers or the other staff that are providing the assistance and not assuming that they've actually had all this training either. And making sure that we're doing the considerations that are specific to the individual clients as well. So thank you very much. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for that. Thank you for having me. And I hope that I've convinced everyone that's watching that a bed is not just a bed.
Oh, I've definitely been convinced. I'm sure others have as well. So yes, definitely do reach out directly to Illissa if it's a question related to beds. If you're not sure if it's a Claire question or Illissa question, you're welcome to email me and I'll send you on to Illissa if it's something more technical than I can answer. But hopefully you've enjoyed this session and we'll see you at a future Your OT Tutor tutorial. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.